I'm going to be honest, when Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment was first announced, I didn't really care for it. Saw the trailer, the endless explosions, the screen filled with enemies flying all over the place, and I thought, oh dear, not another one of these. I wasn't impressed, and Age of Calamity didn't really do much for me, and I was never really a big fan of the Musou-style gameplay. The kind where you're taking out hundreds of enemies in flashy combos and all that, and it just all starts to blur together. So it's fun for a few minutes, but it just always feels a little bit shallow. And I think that is why I was ready to dismiss this game. It looked like more of the same, just a little bit shinier on the Switch 2. The trailer promised massive battles, epic storylines, familiar heroes, all the usual buzzwords that sound great, but rarely actually deliver. I'm going to hold my hands up. Part of me was definitely being a gaming snob and looking down at the Musou games. Zelda is one of my favourite series ever. I've always seen the mainline games as these carefully crafted experience, full of mystery, atmosphere. Hyrule Warriors, on the other hand, always felt like the opposite. It was loud, it was chaotic, and just felt kind of empty. So when Age of Imprisonment was announced, I just wasn't really on board. I figured it'd be another mindless spin-off that people play for a weekend, and then just forget about a month later. I didn't plan to buy it at first, and it just was not on my radar. In fact, I pre-ordered the game, and then I cancelled it a few weeks before, because I just wasn't really interested. But then the previews and the reviews started coming in. Some people were surprisingly positive, talking about the story, the characters, and the emotional weight of everything, and that caught my attention. There's one thing I do love about the Zelda games, and that's when it manages to make you feel something. That sense of nostalgia, that loss, that hope the series captures so well. So I decided to give Age of Imprisonment a go. I went in with very low expectations, and honestly, I was prepared to be bored, but right away, something felt completely different. The intro had this grand cinematic energy to it, the kind you'd expect from a full-blown mainline Zelda game. The music hits super hard, the characters have emotional stakes, and the gameplay, whilst it's chaotic and also sometimes repetitive, it had a flow to it that I did not expect. There's a rhythm to this game, especially one since I started figuring out the new sync strike system. Suddenly, this is not just button mashing, there's timing, there's teamwork, and there's a sense of impact to every move. So somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I started realising I'm actually having fun here. It wasn't the kind of slow, exploratory Zelda experience that I'm used to, but it had its own thing going on. This sense of scale and urgency, it was working surprisingly well. And as the story unfolded, I found myself more and more invested. The characters actually had arcs that made sense. The cutscenes aren't just filler, they push the story forward in meaningful ways, tied to the larger Zelda mythology. So by the time I hit the first boss fight, I was all in. The scale, the tension, the soundtrack kicking in, it just felt very epic. It's not perfect, it's not polished in every way, but it's powerful in how much it cared about delivering a proper dramatic Zelda story inside this totally different gameplay framework. And that is probably what surprised me the most. I went into Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment expecting to just roll my eyes, and instead I found myself kind of impressed. Not just because it fixed every issue I had with the genre, it definitely did not, but because it managed to make me care. And it reminded me that even a game I thought I would not enjoy, it still surprises me when it's made with genuine passion. I came out of this game with a new kind of respect, not just for Age of Imprisonment, but also for the Hyrule Warriors series as a whole, trying something new, trying something bold, something a bit messy, but it's also meaningful too, and that is not what I expected going in. Well, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button down below for even more Zelda content here on Trifroce Times. And stick around to the end of the video for an exclusive offer to channel members. Okay, first of all, I'm going to talk about my initial skepticism of this game. So, looking back, I think part of my skepticism came from burnout. We've seen various spin-offs and side projects using the Zelda name, but they just didn't really feel like Zelda. I think the number one example for me is Age of Calamity. I just didn't get it, I didn't enjoy it, and it really skewed my opinion of Age of Imprisonment when the first trailers came out. And talking about that, when Age of Imprisonment was first revealed, it looked like another attempt to just squeeze more out of the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom world, this Hyrule we've been living in for the last 10 years or so. The marketing leaned hard into that spectacle, massive battles, hundreds of enemies, non-stop action, but none of that is what really draws me to Zelda games. What I love about Zelda is the quiet moments, the sense of adventure, the discovery, the emotion behind those small moments, not necessarily the scale, the chaos. So when I saw another trailer full of explosions and endless waves of bokoblins flying through the air, I just thought, this is not for me. I'd already been burned by Age of Calamity. I had some, decent ideas, but just got buried under repetition and button mashing, and the story just was not good. I was not impressed with it. It wasn't that I hated the concept overall, it just never felt like it earned that Zelda name beyond the characters and the soundtrack, and it's kind of how I expected Age of Imprisonment to be as well. And the early gameplay previews of Age of Imprisonment didn't help either. They showed these huge maps, objective markers everywhere, a mini-map that looked like an air traffic control screen. All these things just screamed busy work. I figured it would be another 10-hour grind of the same combos over and over again, and maybe a few flashy cutscenes in between. And the trailers hinted at a deeper story, but let's be honest, that is what they always say. Even spin-offs promise a darker, emotional tale until you actually play it and realise it's just another string of missions loosely tied together. But maybe I was just being stubborn, and there was definitely a part of me that wanted it to prove me wrong. There's something about the Zelda universe that always pulls me back, no matter the format, no matter the game. Even if I think I'm done, I end up checking out whatever new experiment they are trying. I went into this one expecting it to confirm all my worst assumptions. It would be flashy. It's going to be a hollow experience that doesn't understand what makes Zelda special. So when I finally sat down to play Age of Imprisonment, I was ready for it to really annoy me. I expected the repetition, the empty dialogue, the overblown story. I even told myself I'd play a few missions to get a sense of it and then maybe move on, but as it turns out, that was completely the wrong attitude. Within the first couple of hours, the game started doing things that made me stop, pay attention, and rethink what I thought I knew about this series and, crucially, about this genre too. Okay, next up, let's talk about the turning point. So it didn't happen right away. At first, I was playing on autopilot, running from one objective to another, taking out waves of enemies, half watching the cutscenes whilst also checking my phone. That early prove yourself phase where you're waiting for the game to click? I just did not think it would, but then something quite strange happened. I started paying attention, not because I had to, but because the game made me want to. The missions got more layered, the pacing started to make sense, and suddenly it wasn't just chaos for chaos' sake. There was a rhythm, and there was a structure. First thing that really caught me off guard was the new sync strike system. Sounds very, very simple, but it changed the whole flow of combat for me. Instead of mindlessly spamming combos, you start timing your attack with allies by pressing the L button. You chain those hits together in a way that actually feels earned. It gives the action this sense of rhythm that is incredibly satisfying once you get the hang of it. And then I realised this game was doing something smarter than I gave it credit for. It's definitely still a Muso at heart, there's no denying that. But it's a version that has learned from its past mistakes. It's faster, it's cleaner, it's way more responsive, it runs beautifully on the Switch too. The camera doesn't fight you as much, the impact feels heavier, and when you land one of these sync strikes with your partner in battle, it is really, really fun. But even more than the gameplay, it's the tone of the game that hooked me. I was expecting a kind of goofy side story, something throwaway, but the story in Age of Imprisonment actually has weight to it. It doesn't just use Zelda characters as window dressing, it builds on their personalities, their fears, their relationships. It's about war, loss, and what it means to fight when you already know how the story ends. So there's a few moments in this game where the music swells, the battlefield is on fire, everything just feels huge. There's some really cinematic moments here that you only get in mainline Zelda games. And that is when I stopped thinking of Age of Imprisonment as a side project and started seeing it as a genuine entry in the Zelda universe. This one is canon after all. It's not trying to be Breath of the Wild or trying to be Tears of the Kingdom, it's carving out its own identity and doing it pretty well. By that point I wasn't just playing out of obligation anymore, I was definitely into Age of Imprisonment. I wanted to see where the story was going. I knew where the story ended, but how we got there was the most important part. I wanted to unlock these new abilities, and maybe most surprisingly, I was having fun with the combat. That repetition that used to annoy me suddenly felt more like a rhythm that I could get lost in. Something cathartic about it once you stop fighting against it and just learn to lean into the spectacle. It's like watching a Marvel movie or something. You know what the action is going to be like, you just have to sit there and simply be entertained. And that was the moment I realised that Age of Imprisonment wasn't this lazy spin-off that I assumed it would be. It was a passionate, ambitious reimagining of Zelda's world through a completely different lens. The game is definitely not perfect, but it is bold. And for the first time, I found myself thinking, maybe, in the past, maybe, just maybe, I've been a little bit too harsh on the series. Okay, next up, let's have a look at the story and the world. So what really sealed the deal for me wasn't just the gameplay, it was the story. And I can't believe I'm actually saying this to you right now about a Hyrule Warriors game. Usually the story in these spin-offs is just an excuse to get all the characters in one place and start swinging swords, but Age of Imprisonment actually tries with the story and, I would say, really succeeds. It's got a story that's not only coherent, but genuinely emotional, and something feels worthy of the Zelda name. From the beginning, there's this sense of scale and tragedy that hangs over everything. You're not just fighting random mobs, you're part of this war that feels desperate, where every battle costs something. And there's also clear links to Tears of the Kingdom as well. You know, we've got those cutscenes in Tears of the Kingdom. Well, Age of Imprisonment actually does a really good job of filling in between those cutscenes, and you get a sense that Zelda lived an entire lifetime in the past. It's really interesting and much more than I thought from a Musou game. There's this constant tension between hope and inevitability, because deep down, you know, we do know how this story is going to end. The writing surprised me as well. It's definitely not Shakespeare, but it is thoughtful in a way that it uses the familiar characters, and it also introduces new characters as well. We know Rauru, we know Sonya, we know Zelda and Minero. They're all well-established characters, but there's loads of other characters as well that are gradually introduced into the game, and all of them have pretty good writing. I'm a particular fan of the Goron Sage. The Zelda is her familiar symbol of hope in the game. She's a leader who's scared, trying to keep it together under the impossible pressure. And there's also this sense of camaraderie between the characters which makes the world feel alive. Like these characters actually know each other and care about one another, and they're going on a journey together. It's a very good package for the overall story. Then you got the presentation as well. The cutscenes are genuinely impressive, full of energy, emotion, and also they work really well. They pop off the screen on the Switch 2, whether you're in docked mode or you're playing on a big screen. But it's the tone that really got to me. The world feels ancient and heavy, like it's already lived through many wars. The music absolutely nails it as well. It's got this orchestral power behind it, with a mournful edge, constantly reminds you this isn't a triumphant adventure, it's a fight to survive against fate. So there are moments where the game slows down, scenes of reflection, and they do hit harder than I expected. Those little moments give the chaos meaning. They make the story feel less like an excuse for action and more like a proper narrative about endurance and sacrifice. There's a particular moment with Zelda, the Korok, and the Construct where they all meet for the first time. Absolutely fantastic, and definitely recommend you play through to that game. I think it's around the end of Chapter 3. Honestly, that is when I realised how much care went into this game. You can feel the developers' respect for the Zelda universe in a way that everything connects. The lore, the atmosphere, the dialogue. It doesn't feel like a cash-in. So in a way, it feels like a love letter to Zelda. A very loud, a very messy, over-the-top love letter, sure, but certainly a sincere one. By the time I reach the midpoint of the story, I'm not thinking anymore about the repetition or the grind. I'm thinking about the characters, you know, how they're going to get through this and what they're fighting for. And that is something I never thought I'd say about a Warriors game, and it's completely changed how I see the series. Okay, next up, let's talk about the gameplay loop, because this is where Age of Imprisonment surprised me as well. And I'm going to be upfront, it is still very repetitive. There's no getting around that. It's a Musou game. You're still cutting through massive crowds of enemies, capturing bases and repeating smaller objectives over and over again. On paper, it's not very exciting. And honestly, for the first few missions, it's not exciting. But once you get deeper in, you get past the first few levels, the loop starts to work in a way that is kind of weirdly satisfying. It's hard to explain, but it's almost you've got to play it to really get into it. The game doesn't throw everything at you right away. You start small with just a few characters, few simple missions, basic combos, but as the story progresses, your roster begins to grow, and that is when things start to really open up. Every new recruit brings in something fresh to the table, different weapons, different pacing. For example, playing as the Korok or the construct that looks very similar to Link, it definitely feels clean and balanced. But switch over to Zelda and suddenly you're managing this timing and crowd control, different spells, and it's really, really good fun. Then you've got all the different sages, the classic big Goron, he's nice and slow, he rolls around, he punches really hard with loads of weight. You've got the Zora as well, who kind of swims through the air, is much more of a kind of ballet dancer, rhythm and beautiful movement, but they've also got some really powerful strikes as well. And this is all not just for show as well, you're encouraged to swap between characters mid-battle, assigning them different commands and jumping between them on the fly. And then you've got that back and forth with the game, and it gives this kind of real-time strategy layer that keeps things from getting very stale. You're reacting, you're orchestrating the fight, and setting up plays across the entire map. I mentioned it before, and this is where the sync strikes come in. And for me, it's a game changer here. It lets two characters team up for devastating combos when the time is just right. It sounds quite simple, but it transforms how you approach battles. So instead of just hammering through your enemies, just mashing the buttons mindlessly while you're listening to a podcast or something, you're thinking in terms of synergy between characters, and different characters pair together really well for devastating attacks. You can line up attacks so your characters hit together, chaining one move into another. When it works, it is really, really satisfying. The screen explodes with energy, the camera swings around, and for the moment you feel like you're controlling an army. It actually knows what it's doing. It's the first time I felt a Warriors game actually wanted me to pay attention to the timing and coordination, and not just mashing the buttons mindlessly. And every character's got their own way of syncing up. You start to develop favourite pairs, all those little combinations just click. It's very addictive in the best kind of way. All of this builds into a gameplay loop that is still inherently repetitive, but there is a rhythm to it. Once you find your groove, you stop thinking about the grind and start enjoying the flow. You're pushing objectives, swapping between heroes, and you're watching that chaos unfold. So by the time you unlock the full roster, it's all about mastering it. Combat becomes this playground of experimentation, where every mission feels a little bit different depending on who you bring and how you play, and that is what kept me coming back mission after mission. The gameplay is definitely not perfect, but it's polished enough to make every swing, every combo feel very rewarding. Next up, let's talk about the boss fights and the set pieces. So if there's one thing that Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment nails, it is the scale of these big moments. So say what you want about the repetition, and I certainly have. This game knows how to make a fight feel epic. The boss battles and the large scale set pieces, where all the chaos, all the noise finally comes together in a really, really satisfying way. First time you go up against one of the major bosses, I mean a proper screen-filling monster, it hits different. Camera swings around, the music swells, suddenly you're not just hacking away at mobs, you're in a cinematic showdown that feels like something straight out of a Zelda finale. They're not quick fights either, they're full-on events, you're dodging massive swings, coordinating between multiple characters, timing your sync strikes to chip away at the boss's health. There's a sense of coordination between your team and your characters that really shines against the bosses. It all comes together in terms of understanding how your team fits together. So maybe you send one character to distract the boss while you're fighting a load of mobs. Maybe you swap characters mid-fight to chain a combo that opens up a weak point. It's the kind of fight where everything that you've learned up to that point, every upgrade, every mechanic, suddenly matters. It definitely helps that the presentation during these fights is incredible. Soundtrack goes hard, drums pounding, strings swelling. There's some moments where I actually caught myself grinning thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. I do actually love it. It captures the kind of wild, over-the-top excitement that Zelda usually saves for the finales in its mainline game, except here, it's kind of happening constantly. There are a few things that make it work though. It's not just empty spectacle. The story context gives these battles weight. You're not fighting because the game told you to. You're fighting to protect the characters you've grown attached to in a world that actually feels like it's falling apart. And Ganondorf is controlling and spreading all of that gloom everywhere. That emotional grounding makes the action hit harder. As I've said before, by the halfway point the game had completely won me over. Boss fights weren't just fun, every defeat has pushed you to rethink your approach. It's chaotic, it's over the top, but there's also a kind of beauty in the intensity. Okay, next up, let's talk about how it complements Tears of the Kingdom. So Age of Imprisonment isn't a regular kind of spin-off, it's a genuine prequel to Tears of the Kingdom. It's set long before Link's modern day journey back when Hyrule was still a land of war, prophecy and struggle. That perspective completely changes how you see everything that comes after. In Tears of the Kingdom, Hyrule is in the process of healing, albeit in the early days. You're rebuilding, you're rediscovering, you're creating. But in Age of Imprisonment, it shows you what came before that. The fall, the desperation, the generations of heroes and leaders who fought and sacrificed so that a world could even exist. It's a story that you saw glimpses of in Tears of the Kingdom, but we actually flesh it out in Age of Imprisonment. So it's the peace of Tears of the Kingdom versus the chaos of Age of Imprisonment. It makes both games hit harder. So you start to realise that every ruin that you stumble across in Tears of the Kingdom, it's not just scenery, it's a scar, a remnant of this war, the imprisoning war. And when you fought through those massive battles, you've seen the losses, you've watched Zelda and her allies push themselves to the edge. Those quiet moments in Tears of the Kingdom feel a little bit different. The open world starts to feel even more haunted than it did before, alive with the ghosts of everything that you've seen in Age of Imprisonment. It's one of the things I love about the characters and how they connect between the two. Zelda in Age of Imprisonment isn't the calm, regal figure that we've known before. She's uncertain and still learning how to lead. But watching her struggle in the early days makes her transformation later feel earned, and it's all about Zelda's growth. You see her step into her role as the heart of Hyrule. So Tears of the Kingdom celebrates creativity and rebirth. It's all about what comes after the storm. Age of Imprisonment is all about survival during it. It's messy, it's desperate, it's emotional, but it gives context to the hope that defines Zelda's later story. You can't really fully appreciate what Hyrule becomes without understanding what it went through in Age of Imprisonment. So this is not a mainline Zelda game, but it does play a really important role in expanding the Zelda universe. It's on the other side of the myth. It's part of that history that Nintendo has kind of glossed over before. And when you look at it that way, Age of Imprisonment doesn't just complement Tears of the Kingdom, it kind of deepens the experience, and it gives that world a memory. Okay, so I've talked about why I like this game, but next up I want to talk about reasons why other Zelda fans should check out Age of Imprisonment. First of all, it expands the Zelda lore in a way that no other game does. So Age of Imprisonment, it's not a side story, it is definitely a genuine prequel and explores the wars and the sacrifices that shaped Hyrule long before Tears of the Kingdom. You're going to see this world before it became ruins. It adds emotional weight to the lore, showing the myths and the prophecies that we take for granted. They're actually lived and fought for by real people. Next up, it gives Zelda herself a deeper, more human arc. So this version of Zelda is not the serene, all-knowing figure that we're used to in other Legend of Zelda games. She's vulnerable, unsure, and under enormous pressure to fight in the imprisoning war. So watching her grow from fear to leadership gives you a completely new appreciation for who she becomes later in the series. It's one of the best characterizations of Zelda in years. It's emotional, it's flawed, and also it's incredibly relatable. Next up, the combat. It's simple, but shockingly satisfying. So if you've ever bounced off a Muso formula game before, this game might just change your mind. You've got the sync strikes, you've got the combos, you've got the team-ups. Yeah, it makes every battle feel tactical instead of brainless. You're chaining devastating team attacks between two characters, giving the chaos a sense of rhythm and purpose. And because every hero plays differently between the sages, Zelda, Raru, you've got Mineru, you've got the Construct, you've got the Korra. There's so many characters in this game. Combat feels surprisingly varied once your roster expands. Next up, the boss battles feel like a playable Zelda finale. So few games capture the scale and the drama of a Zelda boss fight like this one does, and here you get dozens of them. Massive creatures, sprawling battlefields, orchestral music blaring in the background. It's everything you love about Zelda's big moments, just turned up to 11. Now, every major fight feels like a final boss battle of a mainline Zelda game. And finally, it makes Tears of the Kingdom hit even harder. So this one is a well-written, thought-through prequel to Tears of the Kingdom. Adds context and emotional weight to that world that you explore later. The ruins, the scars, the tone of Tears of the Kingdom feels more meaningful when you've seen what came before. It's like reading the missing chapter of a story you already love. I mentioned it before in this video, You got all the cutscenes in Tears of the Kingdom, and Age of Imprisonment does a really good job of filling in those gaps between the cutscenes, so you can almost watch them together. It's very good. You know, Tears of the Kingdom is a very long game. I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing Age of Imprisonment straight after Tears of the Kingdom. You might want to give it a little bit of a gap. That's certainly what I did, and it made me go back and appreciate Tears of the Kingdom even more. Okay, there are some reasons there why I think all Zelda fans should play Age of Imprisonment, but I do have some final thoughts that I'm going to bring to you now. So, by the time the credits rolled, I did have to laugh at myself. You know, I spent months rolling my eyes at this game, only for it to completely change my mind. Age of Imprisonment made me realise how much I underestimated what these games could be. It is definitely not perfect, I can't stress that enough. It's not a perfect game. The repetition is still there. There's moments where the chaos can get a little bit too much. Sometimes the screen just feels like it's having a nervous breakdown. But even with all of that, I came away from the game with something I did not expect, and that is appreciation for a Hyrule Warriors game. There's a heart to it, a sincerity. It shines through in every mission. You can tell the people who made it care about the Zelda franchise. They care about the world, about the lore, about Hyrule, about the tone. They found a way to express this through a wild, over-the-top combat system. What really sticks with me is how much it made me feel. The story hits heavier than expect from a Warriors game. There's moments of loss, of triumph, genuine emotion. Towards the end, I'm not ashamed to say I shed a tear, and it all lands because the game takes the world seriously. It's not trying to parody Zelda or twist it into something unrecognisable. It's trying to celebrate the world that we all know and we all love. It is a well thought out prequel. It's a different lens onto the same world as Tears of the Kingdom, showing you a side of Hyrule that don't normally get to see. It's raw, it's messy, it's loud, but it's also full of heart. So I went into playing Age of Imprisonment expecting another forgettable button mashing game, but instead I got one of the most unexpected emotional Zelda experiences that I had in years. It's definitely not for everyone, but that is okay. But for me, it was a reminder that even the games that you think you're not going to enjoy can surprise you if you give them a chance. And before this game came out, I dismissed this game. I did not give it a chance, but I sat down, I played it, and it changed my mind for very good reasons. Age of Imprisonment is not flawless, but it's definitely earned my respect. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's a whole lot better than I ever gave it credit for. And that is where I've ended up with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. It's a game that I was fully prepared to dislike, and somehow it's turned out to be one of my favourite games in the second half of this year. I still think it is rough around the edges, and I totally get why some people don't vibe with it, but if you've written off Hyrule Warriors games in the past like I did, this one might just change your mind. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think about it. So did Age of Imprisonment win you over, or are you still not convinced? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how people are feeling about this game. And if you enjoyed this video and it got you thinking differently about the game, you know, leave a like or subscribe or a comment. You know, it really helps me out. Well, that is it for my thoughts and review of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and thank you, as always, so much for watching or for listening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for even more Zelda content here on Trifroce Times. Thanks again, I'll see you in the next video.